I spent my career in politics and government, and my message to you today is get involved. You can make a difference. But before I do that, I'd like to tell you a little bit more about the perspective I bring and how it affects the advice I give. I'm a first-generation Italian American. My father came here from Italy in 1920. He worked 3 jobs. His mantra was work hard, get a good education, and be a man of your word. Now, my mother, that was something different. She believed I could do almost anything, so her concentration was on feeding me. So I can tell you that thanks to the advice of my father and mother, I can tell you that I worked very hard at eating as much good Italian food as I can find. So you can thank my mother for inspiring the title of this presentation. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu. I got my law degree from DePaul University. I spent 3 years as assistant state's attorney in Cook County prosecuting street gangs. And in 1974, I was elected to Congress at the age of 30 in a 2-to-1 Republican district. That was 40 years ago. I had trouble getting anyone in Washington to come over and campaign for me because the district was so Republican, nobody thought I could win. A friend of mine came to me and said, hey, he could get me a newly elected senator about my age to come in. I said, who's that? He said, Joe Biden. I said, who? He says, funny, he said the same thing when I said Marty Russo. Now, when it comes to Joe Biden today, nobody says Joe who anymore. When I first arrived in Washington as part of the Watergate class of 1974, Tip O'Neill brought me into the inner circle of Democratic leadership. Since I was this fearless young guy with a lot of energy, Tip decided to make me a deputy whip. My job was to round up votes for Democratic issues. During those years from 1975 to 1993, even though the Democrats controlled the House of Representatives, we still had a big group of conservative Democrats from the Deep South. And ask Bob Talley about Oklahoma back in those days. But by today's standards, they'd all be Republicans. In fact, most of those districts are Republicans. Tip knew he couldn't count on those 75 to 80 Democrats to vote with us on every issue. So what was his response? Well, we'll send in this brand new whip, kid who didn't know any better. He was going into the lion's den. So here I was, young, cocky, fast-talking kid from Chicago, being sent in to whip these slow-talking, whiskey-sipping Southern bulls who've been there for decades. Remember, this was the 70s. It's like sending John Travolta into Duck Dynasty and convincing him to stop hunting and go disco dancing. That's a little bit of a tough sell. But over time, I got the reputation of delivering yes votes that really nobody expected. So what was the secret? You had to have relationships so people trust you and believe in you. In Congress, I took the time to get to know those Southern Democrats. I went to where they sat as a group. They had this little section on the center aisle of the House of Representatives. They sat there every day. So I went over there to talk to them, find out what their districts are like, what was their point of view, and find out what made them tick. Paddleball. I never heard of paddleball from Chicago. So I decided if I'm going to meet these guys and understand them, I better go and find them and work with them on their turf. The so-called 3 sacred paddleball courts in the House Gymnasium. Now, I can tell you, we had a lot of competitive values and many, many lasting relationships were made. So what I learned is that you need to invest time getting to know people before you ask them for something. I'll end with a quick story. There's this lady from Chicago, she retires. and decides to go to Scottsdale because she wants to get away from those bitter cold winters in Chicago. She's in good health, but she wants to plan ahead for herself. So she goes into town to see a lawyer to make her last will and testament. She meets with the lawyer for about a half an hour, and he looks at her and says, well, ma'am, everything you will is pretty standard, no real problems here. But if you have any special request, I'll be happy to add a codicil to your will. She thinks about it and she says, well, I wish to be buried in Chicago. The lawyer looks at her and says, to be near your family? Well, she said, no. As a lifelong Democrat, I want to stay active in politics and vote long after I'm gone. So as we say in Chicago, vote early and vote often. So like that lady from Chicago, you need to get involved and stay active. Each of you in this room has the ability to make a difference. Taking the time to get involved is the best way to make sure that you're at the table, you're not on the menu. Thank you, and if you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. Thank you.